It's now 9 o'clock. Welcome to our Premier and Constitutional Matters meeting. And I'm not going to answer a call on what looks like car insurance. Just turn my phone onto silent. Can I just ask everyone to put their phones onto silent? Okay, so welcome to the meeting. And April is, I think we might see quite a lot of each other in April because we're going to have to push some extra meetings in. Can I just ask at this point for the we all know what we need to do, and we'll introduce ourselves for the record. So I'm Benedicta van Binnen, and I'm the chair of this committee.
Good morning, Chair. Wendy Kaiser-Philander, member of this committee.
Thomas Walters, I'm a member of this committee.
Janita Stevens, I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning, Leon van Wyk. I'm a member of this committee.
I don't believe, presiding procedural officer, that we have anyone online. Okay, we have received apologies from member Heron. Have we heard anything from member Said? Nothing. Okay. Okay, so the agenda for today is the issue of the guidelines for the interview process, the Children's Commissioner. We must also talk about the Public Administration Management Amendment Bill, which is quite a mouthful, and the Public Services Amendment Bill. So let us start. Let's get it out the way. Let's deal with the amendment bills. So the NCOP has sent us the negotiating mandate to do public participation on the two bills during April, which is really not a great time, but we're going to have to try to squeeze them in at some point. I would propose, but I'd like people's opinions, that we explore if we can do this virtually as a virtual public participation. They're not particularly contentious. They're quite niche. So I don't foresee a lot of people having opinions, and the ones who will be participating will probably have quite a keen understanding of the current bills. I just want to get a feeling from the room about your views on virtual hearings, or should we do a live hearing? Anyone? Volunteers?
Chairperson, if I can perhaps ask, how many are we talking about?
It's two bills, but they're kind of interlaced, as it were.
Okay.
So it's the Public Administration Management Amendment Bill and the Public Service Amendment Bill. They basically speak to the same thing as you're going through the NCOP.
And what is the intention on how many hearings is anticipated?
If we do virtual hearings, it's easier to do possibly 3. We could do East, West, and City. Obviously, if we have to do live hearings, it gets a bit more complicated in terms of time.
Chair, I agree with your proposal, given the program, obviously, and the timeframes attached to what it is that we need to do. So I support you.
Okay, thanks very much. So then let's explore when we can do virtual hearings. And obviously, A, can we do virtual hearings without problem? And B, then we can do 2 or 3. We can maybe do them the same afternoon, even. If they're virtual, it's much easier to do that way. Okay, so then the main purpose for today is the issue of the Cape Commissioner for Children. I'm trying very hard to call them the Commissioner for Children, because that's what it says in the Act. So we have now, I've got an update. I'm just going to run through the slides. In terms of the nominees who have been sent in, you have been sent links to the various CVs. There are quite a lot of CVs. And what we're going to have to do is shortlist. Once you've shortlisted, then obviously settle on the interviews, do the interviews, and then nominate a candidate to the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. In terms of the criteria, what I've got in this presentation, and we can then discuss it, is what was used in 2019. So I just want to run through it, and then we can discuss, do we want to replicate it, or do we want to do some changes to it? I think what's important is that it's the kind of job where we have a lot of applicants. There were 62 nominees. 18 have not sent CVs, which does lessen the pool somewhat. But I think we need to work very carefully that in the event of an appeal, we have everything covered so that we can illustrate why we selected, for example, a certain shortlist, and ultimately how we come to determine a certain candidate. I think it needs to be very open. So I think if we can just run through the presentation and then we can open up for discussion. The process is very tight. We have to nominate a candidate by the beginning of May. So it's regulated quite strictly in the bill. And the proposed key dates that the PO and I have come up with is that next week in the afternoon of the 2nd of April, we do the criteria for shortlisting. Then people will have an opportunity between the 2nd and the 8th to look at the candidates, to do the shortlisting, and then on the 8th of April, we finalize that shortlisting. Then we can obviously do the interviews. There we've identified the 15th to the 17th of April. If possible, if we use the 15th and the 16th, we can use the 17th for deliberations if there is a debate or a discussion. And then try to send the report to the House by the 24th of April. We can just go on to the next slide. So this is just understanding the Western Cape Commissioner for Children Act. It is quite clear in how it views the process. It's in line with the Western Cape Constitution. And this comes back from 2018. Then section 78 to 80 of the Western Cape Provincial Constitution provides the establishment and the principles governing the Commissioner for Children, the powers, duties, appointment, and removal. So we do need to stick very much to the letter of the law here. As you know, the current Commissioner for Children was the first one appointed, and it's only the Western Cape that has this commissioner. And I think we have probably learned quite a lot. And we can implement this now as we look at the selection for the next Commissioner for Children. Just go on to the next slide. Okay. Section 79 of the Act stipulates the Commissioner for Children would have does have the power as regulated in the provincial legislation, and it shows you what it is that the Commissioner for Children does, the scope of their duties, and also how they advise government. I think there we've particularly learned a lot of lessons that we need to keep in mind as we move forward. We can go on to the following slide. Okay, so where we are at the moment, the nominations were published in the media. They were open for 14 days, and the public was invited to nominate candidates, which they did using a standard nomination form. That process has now happened. That's getting a bit small. Thanks. So the nominees were notified on the 18th of March of their nomination and requested to submit, firstly, whether or not they accepted nomination. Of the 61 nominees, 44 accepted, 16 had no response, and 1 declined. They were also asked to submit their CVs, 3 contactable professional references, and a copy of their ID documents and qualifications. If you have used the link that has been uploaded, you will see the ones that have done that have added those documents, and one can go and read them. There is a public objection period. This is laid down in terms of legislation. So the list of nominees is being published as we speak, and it invites objections. Objections will be received and reviewed. Then we would need to look at those objections. They must have credibility and merit. In 2019, the committee agreed that the objections should only be considered and deliberated on after the shortlisting process was finalized, because some of the objected candidates might not be shortlisted. However, if candidates with objections are shortlisted, the committee will also be able to pose questions on the objection during the interview. And we must decide if that process is still fit for purpose. It's probably not a bad suggestion, but we can talk about that at the end of the presentation. And then the criteria for valid objections are specific disqualifications, a criminal conviction, insolvency, reasoned objections that have a basis in fact, not just anonymous, I don't like so-and-so kind of objections. If we go on to the legal framework and the eligibility, which is in the Act, people are disqualified from being Commissioner for Children if they have convictions for dishonesty, violence, or sexual offences. If they have been found unsuitable to work with children, that's in terms of Section 120 of the Children's Act. And if they are unrehabilitated insolvent. Also last time in 2019, the committee then used the SAPS clearance official certificates and credit checks on the shortlist so as not to waste costs in that regard. Member Said, I'm just running through a presentation that shows what the criteria were last time, as well as an update as to where we are, and then we can discuss how we're going to do going forward. There are also certain mandatory qualifications. They have to be a South African citizen and a fit and proper person. I think we must have a discussion about what a fit and proper person would be. Have specialist experience in children's rights, human rights, or public policy. Hold relevant professional or academic qualifications. And not hold political office or be in state service at the time of the appointment. Now, I've asked about that criteria. As I understand it, it's not during the process, it is if they are to be appointed. So no one is expecting anyone to resign from things prior to that point. Then in terms of the shortlisting, we have 44 nominations. We're going to have to do interviews. We're going to obviously then have a shortlist, otherwise we'll be sitting here morning, noon, and night. But it's important that we have a proper, clear scoring framework, and this is what was used in 2019. We can decide whether it is still relevant. So there's the Act reference on the right-hand column. On the left is the category, and then obviously the score. So the category would be academic qualifications, which is public policy, human rights, social work. And the score goes from 1 to 5, depending on what the score of the individual nominee is. A fit and proper person, which encompasses, are there red flags? Are there issues that are raised? All the way through to exemplary integrity. I think that is, to a certain extent, open to debate because this is prior to the criminal checks being performed. And then the practical work experience, ranging from none all the way through to 5. So this was the criteria used to determine the shortlist. We can come back to that and see if there's anything we want to add or change. Then also in 2019, the criteria for the interviews. There's lobbying, which is an inaccurate term, but we'll come back to that. Research and education, monitoring, qualifications, qualities in a commissioner. And then a category I've added for the purpose of discussion. Are there other issues we want to raise? Particularly, I think now we're seeing very much the rise of social media. So I'm not concerned about whether or not somebody had a bad day in 2021, but are there issues that are raised by their social media that is frankly a public utterance that is of concern? Do we need to ask about things like that? Should we be looking at whether or not they have a positive social media reputation, that there's nothing that's popped up in social media that is questionable? If they have taken public positions, you'll see some of the nominees have held positions of some influence. Does one want to ask a question about a finding they have made, or paper they've written, or a judgment that has been made with their involvement? Is that a valid criteria for discussion? And considering the kind of job we're talking about, which is a very influential job, and it's a Section 9 institution, they report to the Provincial Parliament. Should the interviews be, I say, JSC type interview points? Do we then look at the individual candidate, and in addition to the criteria that we have, can one ask them questions about what they have been doing specifically and about their suitability? Is that a category we want to use? So I'll come back to you when we finish this, Member Walters. So I'll just put that there for the discussion. I think, we've seen very much with the rise of social media and social media, not influencers, but the value seeing of social media, but that really is something we can't ignore. Here are the criteria in more depth. Lobbying. You can have a look. We will send the presentation to everyone, which would be an in-depth knowledge of government structures to make sure that this is somebody who actually understands what the job is that they're applying for. Understanding of legislation, strong public participation, advocacy skills, integrity, the ability to influence stakeholders, the capacity to balance the competing rights of children. I think more and more in school spaces and sports spaces, we're seeing the need for that. And then obviously research skills. The next criteria is research and education. This is different to qualifications. This is essentially what they have been doing and where they've been working. 3 is looking at monitoring experience and monitoring skills. I won't go through the whole slide. 4 is qualifications for appointment, what their actual qualifications are, their experience, that not a current member of the Parliament, provincial legislature, or local council, we must discuss that. Not employed by any other organ of state at the time of the appointment, and not holding political party office at the time of the appointment. Then 5 is investigate and advise on the qualities of a commissioner. That is really looking at the candidate in and of themselves, who they are, what they've managed to build, what they would use going forward. Second last slide is then the procedure, where one has the interview, which is the permanent committee members, from the 15th to the 17th. The committee report, and then obviously the recommendation that goes to Parliament, which ultimately then goes to the Premier. And then the last slide, the agreements and procedures for the appointment of the Western Cape Commissioner for Children, protocol for handling objections, which we may well get, determine which meetings will be closed, then the criteria for shortlisting candidates, which we can then settle on Tuesday, agree on the interview questions, the scoring system for the interviews. And then the last point, it's essential that the same members of the committee participate in all aspects of the appointment process. So it is asking members to make themselves available during April. Unfortunately, it's going to be a very busy month on all sorts of bases, that we can be sure that we have the same people at the workshops, doing the shortlisting, doing the interviews, and then the appointment, so that we have consistency. So that's the presentation of where we are and what happened in 2019. Next Tuesday is when we have the actual workshop to discuss the criteria, but let's just get a feeling now of where we are and whether people agree with us or whether or not we want to change it. I did see Member Walters and then Member Said. And then, is that a hand? Okay, great. Member Walters?
Chair, just based on my understanding, I think this is generally a very good set of criteria. I was particularly concerned about what I see as part of the function is the monitoring and evaluation, the empirical data gathering that goes along with it, and ultimately it's meant to assist with developing policy, and it's a strong research component. It is in the criteria. I just think we mustn't lose sight of that. I think it's not a person telling anecdotal stories. It's somebody that must really advise and assist the province in making a real difference in practice and in policies. So, but it's there. And then you raise the issue of, call it past public behavior. Now, again, I'm also not particularly concerned about what somebody said about, say, the Bulls rugby team in 2018 or whatever the case might be. But I would say, to me, the rule of thumb is there anything there to suggest that the function as per the provincial constitution and as per the act will be, call it, negatively affected? Is there a pattern of behavior that suggests reasonably in a causal manner that job or the ability to do the job or the legitimacy around that particular job will be negatively effective? I think it's about a causal relationship for me. That's how I think about it. And Chair, I don't know, perhaps also a discussion that might be useful if everyone in the committee have the same idea of what we actually want from a children's commission. Doesn't mean we have to agree on individuals. I don't want to preempt any process, but I think what's in the mind's eye, if that's clear for everyone, I think it will also assist the process.
Thanks very much. Member Sayed?
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, just and I'm a little bit. I must apologize for only asking this question at this late stage of the process. Just with regards to the procedure around the interviews and the committee report, obviously we are seized with this. I just wanted to get a sense, given, I mean, and I remember the experience last term where the Social Development Committee, just so that, I mean, just in case it gets asked, last term, the Social Development Committee, according to my memory, were the ones who conducted the interviews and ran with the process. Then after the commissioner was appointed, then only the commissioner was then introduced to this particular committee. This time around, it's a bit different. I don't have an objection to it because I think the approach we're following is the correct one, because this committee signs off on the budget of the Department of the Premier, and that is the department that funds this, and it's a Chapter 9 institution, so it's correct. But I just wanted to get a sense as to, are we covered in that regard? How do we explain that in case that question gets asked? Why is it now with us? Why no longer social development? Are we aware of that background? Thank you.
Member Councillor Philander, I know you were involved last time. Can you shed any light on that? I believe that it was referred to the Premier Committee.
The Chair, the Act and the bill was dealt with by the Standing Committee on Premier, and when the Act had to be implemented, the then Speaker referred the matter to Social Development. So the Act states that the matter must be referred to a committee that deals with children, and I think at the time there was a debate whether it must go to Premier or Social Development, and it went to Social Development. It didn't really make a difference because both committees work with Premier is a transversal kind of committee, but because the budget still sits within the Department of the Premier, it's now with us, but it's not supposed to. That budget will be moving into like a Chapter 9 kind of institution. Remember, the Commissioner discussed that she wants her own office. She wants to be independent from the Department of the Premier. So the only reason why there's a relationship is because the funds are coming from the Department of the Premier's Program 1 budget. Yeah, thank you, Chair. But otherwise, the committee we're safe.
Can I also just add that I think also experience has shown us over the last 5 years, if one reads the reports that come from the Commissioner for Children, it's not just social development, it's community safety. A lot of it is education. So it is preferable, well, that's my personal opinion, that the Premier's committee deals with it, because then it's more transversal and is actually able to have insight into the various other committees. Member Walters, have you got an answer there?
Chair, you covered me.
Right. Anything else? Okay. And then I've got Member Van Wyk.
Thanks, Chair. I've just been trying to think, even before this meeting, what does one do in terms of shortlisting? How does one try and determine that type of criteria to find the right person? So in many ways, I'm quite glad that there are these weighted KPIs and the 3 categories that we have there. But we then move to that area of suggested criteria for interviews, and the list that we have there in terms of what we're expecting in such a person. And then I ask myself, are we sufficiently covered within the weighted KPIs? Because somehow we're going to have to pick out of the CV and the documentation in front of us whether that person is suitable and whether that person has got demonstrated expertise. Probably that's going to come out in that criteria for interviews. And, so are we covered in the KPI? Now, I don't quite have an answer on that. It's still a bit of area that I'm trying to think how we mull over. And then ultimately we sit with a whole bundle of CVs, and you've got to work through those CVs, and we've got to find some way how we're going to work through that. Does every member on that committee create a little bit of a score sheet, and then ultimately do we look at those scores at the end of the day? And then I think of outlying positions where there may be certain points that are scored very highly, whereas the group as such scores in a more of a closer area on the 1 to 5 type of thing. How does one deal with aspects there? Or someone gets scored a 1 where certain members feel that it is a 1 which might not be necessarily valid. will be unfair, how one deals with those aspects to try and narrow down, obviously, that core group that one wants to interview. So those were just some of my thoughts where I don't have immediate answers for.
Look, I think that's a very fair question. What I've been wrestling with over the weekend with the CVs, and I took some time to run through them, is that there's a vast array of different experience. So one has people who come from very much, for example, a social development background, all the way through to people who have a very legalistic background, and then other issues where they have a different kind of training, but they have found themselves working with children over the years. And everyone, all those different fields have something to add. And I think it's very important that when we do the scoring for the shortlist, we look quite comprehensively at who they are, which is why the suggestion is that we do the workshop on Tuesday, so that you've now, for between now and Tuesday, you have a week to really get into what's a lot. It's a dense pack of documentation to actually really have a read and a think about it, because it also will give us some kind of guidance as to how we score those very diverse categories, so that when we have our discussion next Tuesday, we can discuss exactly that. That you have somebody who has, for example, got a PhD, but who has always worked for possibly in a very academic environment, versus somebody who might have a lesser academic qualification, but who has worked very extensively in quite a sphere of spaces. You'll see some candidates have 2 or 3 very different qualifications that have come together to inform a career where they've worked extensively with children, looking at things that one hasn't even considered that could really be relevant. So I think it's really important that we have a very open mind to the criteria and how we actually develop that scoring sheet next week, so that after Tuesday, everyone has then got a week to go score everyone, and then we sit down with that shortlist and people can defend the shortlist. So that if somebody comes with, for example, let's say Member Walters comes with somebody who has got a long career in rugby, he can motivate why someone who has a long career in rugby should be dealing with issues pertaining to children, but is not just finding the under 13, best under 13 team. And if you can defend that, then one looks at it. So I think we need to put quite a lot of thought work into this. It's not something one can just look at a list of people and say, oh, well, I like number 1, number 5, number 10, and number 15. We have to be able to defend why we've chosen that particular shortlist. Yes, Member Walters.
Sure, I would like to very strongly support that, because I think these processes tend to become a bit of a mechanical exercise, and then it's based on fairly subjective arguments about this individual or that individual. And I really think the mindset should be, here's a Section 9 institution that's meant to fulfill a particular role. I think we need to be clear as to what that role is, what we envisage that role to be, and whether and what characteristics a particular candidate should have in that regard. Now, again, I might be, it might just be my own way of looking at things, my own way of understanding this. I might be completely wrong, but I would, for example, be somebody that emphasize the policy, research, monitoring, evaluation, ability to galvanize institutions and bodies in that field. Somebody else might think of it more as a kind of an activist role, a more public profile type of thing. So all those discussions we should have. But what I like about what you are suggesting is, let's give it some real thought. If you rush decisions, the consequences of it is far worse than just taking that bit of time to have a meeting of minds. And at the end of the day, our primary objective should be to have a institution that is working, really working in the Western Cape government. And I think I support that particular approach. It'd be a bit of a brainstorm, not just the mechanical exercise. I support that.
Certainly from my side, one thing that I've wrestled with looking at the reports that we received from the Children's Commissioner from this term. And I think it's something that a lot of us who've got legislative experience probably do wrestle with. Certainly when I was in Scopa, both in the city and also in National Parliament, it's good and well to write a report. But then what? What does one do with it? How does one incorporate an independent report from a Section 9 institution like this into what's the best way of dealing with it going forward? Because one can sit and listen to reports. I think we all do all the time. But in terms of the role of the Commissioner for Children, what do we want to see and how can that difference be made? And I think when we look at a candidate to take on the next 5 years, which is quite a long term and it's an influential position, we need to be on the same page as to what we're hoping to see come out of this process and how we can really maximize that position in the Western Cape, which is why people should really think quite hard about the role of that. And what I will do in the next week is, I won't snow you with papers, you've already got a lot to read, but send a couple of issues. I think we've already sent the Act out. A couple of things like that, so that when we have the workshop, we are very much prepared to discuss in depth what those criteria should be. But in terms of this presentation, is there anything else we'd like to add to the criteria, remove, refine, that we can discuss next week? Yes, Member Wendy Philander.
Chair, thank you very much for the guidelines in terms of the process going forward. I think I'm quite happy and I can agree with members that spoke before me. I just wanted to check with you, Chairperson, as we move towards next week, Tuesday, are we going to work with the list of 44? Is that now our guiding document, if I can call it that?
Okay. I would put before the committee, and it's for you to give me guidance. If people have already missed the deadline for sending us CVs or for accepting, I would say it indicates that there is a lack of interest. I know the procedural officer has made a big effort to follow up with everything. And I just want to hear, should we be working with the 44 and excluding those who have not responded to date? Or are there other ideas on that? Member Kaiser-Philander?
Yeah, I really want to urge the committee, and I support your stance or your proposal made on moving forward in terms of with those that did comply. I think that in itself will almost put this committee on a footing as well, that, you know, from the word go, we comply in terms of the timeline, so that not other things during the process it interferes, as you have to now go look for this person's whatever is missing from the pack, that we stick to that, where there were timelines and there were no submissions, that we discard those applications, Chair.
Okay, but I've got Member Walters, Member Stevens and Member Sayed.
Chair, you will also recall from my committee when we dealt with it, my feeling with these things are you stick to the letter, to the notice. It's just a solid institutional practice, and I also think it avoids, frankly, appeals and conflation of processes when it comes to this type of thing elsewhere as well. I think one must absolutely stick to the letter of the notice to avoid call it a litigious kind of behavior, and I think it's a good institutional practice.
Thank you. Member Stevens?
I fully agreed with Member Walters and Member Philander that we stick to the 44. If you miss the deadline, you miss it.
Right. Thank you. Member Sayed?
I'm covered.
Okay, great. So we add idiom on that. That is less CVs to read, I must say, having 44. It is also consistent with what we did with the Language Commission and the Cultural Commission. And I think it's important that as government, if there is a deadline, we stick to it, that we don't have this constant shifting of things. Okay. I will then send documentation to people to just have a read. You do all have the link to the CVs. I just want to find out if the presiding officer, is there anything on those CVs that still needs to be loaded? Have they all been loaded in? Okay. And everyone, I did find one that was empty. It's loaded, great. Member Walters?
Perhaps it's me not following, which happens from time to time. we were speaking about people missing the deadline. I think we were at Idem there. Are there any instances of incomplete information, and should we have a different view there? My view is, as per the notice, as per the letter of the law, that's a problem as well.
Okay, it's part of the presiding officer, procedural officer.
Chair, the CVs are there, so that will assist the committee members to do the scoring and the criteria and all those things. Some of them has not submitted their maybe their ID, which is something that we can get at a later stage. But I don't think they should be disqualified because if the committee decides, they'll actually have to re-screen those folders and see. But most of those people have submitted, but then they maybe didn't put their ID in, and it's something I can follow up. But if the committee decides, then I'll actually have to redo that list.
Should we allow just to rectification if they haven't put in a certain document, or do we want to have a hard border on that? Anyone? Member Walters?
I'm inclined to say what did the notice say, and if it's not compliant with the notice, then it's tough luck. I don't want to sound petty. ID sounds like a fairly minor thing, but at the same time, once you start call it whittling away on a notice and what it said in a notice, and it opens the door to things. So I would say, when in doubt, stick to the requirements of the notice.
Okay. Okay, we've got support for that.
I support you.
Okay, right. So if they aren't up to date and all compliant, it's a hard close. Okay. So then in terms of the criteria for next week and the workshop, where we will really then come out of that with a finalized document, go through the presentation. Has this been emailed to everyone yet?
No.
Okay, we will email it to everyone, go through it. Have a think very hard about it, and be aware that on next Tuesday, after we finalize those criteria, we then will individually all be able to score the candidates so that we have a suggested shortlist by the 8th. On the 8th, we then finalize that shortlist, and we then start scheduling those interviews. You'll find, Member Said, sorry, I think you came in after the first slide, which has got the suggested dates, which is the 2nd of April for the finalizing of the criteria, the 8th of April to shortlist and finalize the shortlist for interviews, the 15th to the 17th of April for the interviews, because you want to, there is a sitting on the 24th of April, and we want to try to do the report to the House by then. Okay, hold on a second. In terms of the references, we asked for 3 contactable references. If at this stage they've only sent us 2, do we ask for a 3rd, or do we follow the Walters principle of saying they haven't complied? Okay, so she will see what the notice says. They're not compliant with the notice. And it said 3. Also, with respect, I think if one's applying for this job, one should have 3 people who can say nice things about you.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, so it'll take a day or so just to refilter all those folders, but I think there's plenty to be looking at and having a read of. And I think very much in those KPIs, maybe if Member Van Wyk can do us a short suggestion on exactly how we do the weighting of those KPIs, because that is also something we can discuss. Member Van Wyk?
Oh, no, certainly I won't do it now. I just thinking through the process and what has been said now, we mentioned there a fit for purpose category. And then we also talk, I think, about experience. Now, what we've also mentioned here is, in effect, what is that person going to do once appointed in terms of the practical effect of that? Because it's almost then something like potential. It goes beyond experience. It's actually the workability of that person to fulfill the needs or what we perceive here. So, you know, and that might be something different from a fit and proper or additional to a fit and proper. And probably in my mind, perhaps additional to a practical work experience. So, but it's something that one's got to mull over, I guess.
It is quite a nebulous is not quite the right word. It's quite an amorphous kind of qualification. What is fit and proper, particularly in this context? It's easier to filter somebody out because they might have a financial issue that stands in their way or something like that. But I think it also pertains to what we were discussing earlier about public statements of people and public positions. If one has somebody who has taken a wildly inappropriate position on something to do with compulsory schooling, for example, I'm just thinking of a reference. Does that make them a fit and proper person in this context? Whereas it might not be relevant somewhere else. Is it something that affects the functioning of that person as a children's commissioner? So, okay. All right, so that ticks that then. Then that we will, the meeting next Tuesday is in the afternoon. It is the 2nd. We've been given consent to have that meeting. In the morning, there is, no, the ESS training is, there's this POC. So no one is looking at anybody other than to say, let's hope that our time is such that we can then meet at 2 o'clock. In that vein, the POC meeting is online. Yes, this is a workshop and it'll be the venue we've been given is room 2. I don't think we can insist on it being everyone there being live because I know a lot of April is going to be electronic. But if people are available to be there live, it could be useful. So I'll just leave that with everyone. Obviously, sometimes one can't, but I think I'll just raise that then. Then on to the draft committee meeting minutes of the 11th of March. If we can just screen that. Yes, yes, we will. We just pull these up. Okay, if everyone can have a squint at that. We'll see who was there. I think everyone was present. And then we have the department. And we have the minutes. Is there anything there that anybody wants to raise or correct? If not, can we have a proposer and a seconder? Member Fernandez.
I move that we adopt, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's great. Okay, then just the last issue is the resolutions around the Public Administration Management Amendment Act. Must be a shortening for that. And the Public Services Amendment Bill. In terms of what our discussion was, let me just go through this quickly. So the briefing was received on the 22nd of November 2024 regarding the 2 bills. We received the program from the NCOP yesterday with a negotiating mandate due on the 13th of May. We've discussed doing the public hearings virtually, particularly considering how busy we're going to be between now and May. In terms of the draft resolutions, if I can just read what we need to do in terms of the mandate is which newspapers to advertise in English, Afrikaans, and isiXhosa. We can use the Cape Times / Argus, Burger, and Vuyakani, as well as Western Cape PP Communications to draft a media plan. Then request public education to distribute the advert to all the stakeholders list, and we can call for comment on this bill. Do we then agree on those resolutions as well as trying to get consent to do online hearings? Is that in order with everybody? If we cannot do online hearings, oh, we can. All right, so then how many how many of those hybrid hearings, not hybrid hearings, how many of those online hearings do you wish to do? 1, 2, or 3? Yeah. Yes.
Chair, I would propose that we do the 3.
Mm.
And in the regions, as you have indicated, I think being virtual, we might, more people would be able to join online. So I think through the 3, we might cover a vast area in the Western Cape.
Okay. And then also, obviously, we can call for comment up to the 25th of April. Is that also in order? As the procedure officer says, April is very much the month of holidays for various reasons. We'll just have to consult the calendar to make sure that we've got the space then for those dates. As we look, if it's an online hearing, one can push the envelope and do one at 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 5 o'clock. So that is it. Thank you, Member Walters.
Chair, what happens if the feedback is that online hearings might not be compliant? It is a bit of, it's new territory. I happen to think it all depends on how it's done. Whether there's venues where people can link up. So I think a lot has to do with the logistics, but can I suggest that if there's a problem that we leave it to you as the chair then to make a call in that regard with a minimum of 3 hearings?
We can do that. Look, my advice is that it will comply. It's not, as far as we can determine at this point, particularly contentious. So it is very much a product of the GNU. So hopefully we would be in a positive space. Member Kaiser Philander?
Chairperson, I'm not sure whether we, perhaps I must speak to it here, since we might need a committee resolution on this. 15, 16, and 17 April. 3 consecutive days for those members in excess of the amount of kilometers outside of the precinct where we will have our interviews. I have inquired, and the answer back is that members should cover the cost through the enabling allowance. Now, should that have been any other work of Parliament, has it been oversight for 3 consecutive days, it would have been covered by the committee budget, obviously. Now, given the, I almost want to say, extent of this process, and that we do want to provide credibility to this process, we don't know that after a specific day there is perhaps a need for the committee to convene for one or other reason in order to take a decision. You won't know, but we need to be focused on that 3 days. So I would want to ask Chairperson for you to consider, even if you don't give an answer now and come back to the committee, whether it would be able, and also considerate of the fact that it's actually constituency period, but I'm happy to oblige. I'm sure other members as well. That is why we were in a position to get approval from the programming authority, because we realize the importance of this process. So, Chair, if I can leave it with you, just to consider that those members that does need accommodation to attend to the 3 days, the committee budget covers that, Chair.
I think it's a very good point to raise, and we will follow up with that. I can't give you an answer now, but we will follow up with that. Member Syed?
No, thank you, Chair. I want to support the member Philander, even though I'm not affected, being resident here, but I think in the interests of members who are not resident in Cape Town, it's very, very important. Just wanted to then get a sense, so it means then members will have to be sleeping over on the 14th if we're starting, because I'm not sure about the times. So if we're starting in the mornings, then members will have to sleep on the 14th, 15th, 16th, and if we end late on the 17th as well. I just wanted to.
I will undertake to come back to the committee this week on that, well before next week. Member Van Wyk, is it in the same?
Yes, I think I'm covering the same aspect, being that it's a long weekend. Effectively starts in the afternoon of the 17th already. So, you're looking at traffic, you're looking at flights, you're looking at all of those difficulties. And I'm not sure, the fact that it is during a recess period, whether we not do it rather than Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. if that is at all possible. I don't know.
Okay, I think that's a fair request. If members are happy with that, let's see if we can do that. I must be honest, as a rule of thumb, I work on the basis that almost every weekend in April tends to be a long weekend. So no, we'll get back to you this week on that. So we have that sorted out. It's not something we need to then be concerned about next week. Okay, great. And then there is coffee and tea for those who want it. Thank you very much. And we will then work through this quite extensively next week. Has everybody signed the register except me? Thanks. All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.